The cold air of the Boeing 747, a mechanical breath against her face, couldn't quell the heat rising in Camila's neck. 26 years old, a flight attendant on her first international flight from New York to London. The turbulence was light, but her eyes caught something beyond the foggy windows. A flash. A screeching sound, lights flickering frantically, the muffled scream of passengers. A dive. The salty smell of the ocean invaded her nostrils, the biting cold of the water. She saw the faces. The same faces that were now peacefully sleeping. The plane breaking apart. Terror froze her veins. Camila felt sweat trickle down her temple, her hand trembling slightly as she served a tray of drinks. It wasn't just an image. It was a visceral sensation of despair and drowning. The smell of kerosene and freshly brewed coffee in the plane's air seemed to intensify the nausea she felt. There had to be a way. What would make her force a delay? A medical emergency, perhaps? But who? She gasped, dramatizing with all the strength she could muster. The panic was fake, but the adrenaline in her veins was real, pounding in her temples. "I'm dizzy," she stammered, eyes closed, forcing tears to well up. The captain was called immediately. The faces in the cabin, some concerned, others just curious, observed the scene. Part of the crew was there, waiting to board the next flight. She saw co-pilot David talking to Sarah, both with expressions of relief and concern. She felt a glimmer of hope. She had succeeded. For a few hours, at least, they were safe, out of reach of that terrible premonition. The smell of disinfectant at the airport and the cold air. Conditioning seemed a strange contrast to the heat of the adrenaline still coursing through her. And the decision was swift. An emergency medical assessment on the ground. Flight 716 would be delayed. She felt the gaze of dozens of people on her, and for a moment, feared her deception would be discovered. How to fake it without arousing suspicion. Camila looked at the clock on the plane wall. There was still time before takeoff. The co-pilot, a tall, sturdy man named David, in his 30s, known for his sense of humor and deep voice, approached with a serious expression. "Camila, what happened?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside her. JFK Airport buzzed outside, a cacophony of announcements and the distant roar of engines. A sound that once calmed her now seemed like an omen. Flight 716, New York to London, seemed normal. Asked Sarah, a veteran flight attendant in her early 40s, with short hair and a welcoming smile, noticing her colleague's unease. Sarah had been like a mentor to Camila, always the first to offer a word of encouragement or practical advice. Too normal. She felt the guilt of the lie, but the urgency of her premonition was greater than any scruple. The flash of the premonition still burned in her mind. A catastrophic electrical failure. She replayed every detail, every face, every silent scream. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Camila took a deep breath, trying to control the uncontrollable trembling in her hands. She turned on the faucet, splashing cold water on her face, trying to compose herself. The image of the falling plane intensified in her mind, almost as if it were happening at that very moment. It had to be now. As she exited, she deliberately tripped, knocking over a drink tray with a loud crash that echoed through the cabin. Passengers' eyes turned towards her, some curious, others annoyed. She clutched her head, feigning acute dizziness, and collapsed in the aisle, groaning loudly. "Excuse me," she said to a colleague, her voice a little hoarser than usual. "I need a minute." In the small galley, she closed her eyes, trying to calm her breathing. "Camila, are you all right?" "Yes, Sarah. Just a bit nauseous," Camila lied, her voice tense. "I guess I didn't sleep well." Suddenly, an idea formed in her mind, desperate, but perhaps effective. She remembered a story Sarah had told about a passenger who had a severe panic attack, forcing an emergency landing. If she could fake something like that, "I think I need some air." "I'm going to the restroom," she said, and Sarah nodded, concerned, watching her go. In the tiny restroom, The stuffy air and the smell of disinfectant didn't help calm her nerves. My head, it's spinning. I can't breathe. Sarah rushed to her, followed by other crew members. I don't know. Everything's dark. As she was taken off the aircraft by paramedics, wheeled down the terminal corridor, Camila looked back. The emergency room at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center in Manhattan was a whirlwind of muffled voices and monitor beeps. The smell of antiseptic and stale coffee permeated the air. Camila lay on a stretcher, eyes open, staring at the white ceiling, the fluorescent lights flickering faintly. The doctor had ruled out any serious issues, attributing the malaise to stress and dehydration. She had performed well in the simulation, her acting convincing enough to fool even medical professionals. "You were lucky, young lady," said the nurse, an elderly woman with a tired smile and kind eyes, checking her pulse with experienced fingers. It could have been something serious. Lucky, she thought, was not being on that plane. The adrenaline that had propelled her earlier now dissipated. Exactly as you had seen it, hadn't you? Giving way to a profound exhaustion that weighed on her shoulders. But the sense of relief was palpable. The passengers? Camila finally managed to ask, her voice trembling, almost a whisper. Yes, she had saved some lives. But what about all the others? The hundreds of souls who were on that flight, who didn't get a chance to be rebooked? Guilt struck her like lightning, an unbearable weight on her shoulders. It was a bitter victory, tinged with tragedy. She found herself wondering if it was fate, or if there was something deeper at play, something she couldn't comprehend. The smell of burning that had come to her mind earlier now seemed to fill the room, though it was only her imagination, a ghostly echo of the catastrophe. Sarah's voice was choked, a mix of shock and despair that could barely be contained. Flight 716 crashed. Only those who were rebooked on another flight due to your delay, Sarah explained, her voice choked with emotion. You saved them, Camila. You saved me. David. Some of the crew. A small ray of sunshine amidst the darkness of the Premonition. She had saved lives. Only the distant hum of the refrigerator breaking the quiet. New York City, outside, continued its frantic pace, oblivious to the tragedy that had just unfolded, to the pain she felt. The premonition had come true, and she had cheated death. But for how long? And what did that mean for the survivors? A new and disturbing question began to emerge in her mind. Had fate been postponed, but not avoided? The air in her chest felt heavy, as if the very oxygen were laden with omens. Camila just nodded, a knot in her stomach. I need to go to the airport, help out where I can, Sarah said, and the call ended, leaving Camila alone with her disturbing thoughts. The images of the premonition returned with overwhelming force. The flickering lights, the dizzying dive, the smell of salt and twisted metal, the screams that turned into bubbles. The precision was chilling, terrifying. A shiver ran down her spine, from the nape of her neck to her toes. It had been real. The premonition was not a delusion, not just a nightmare. It was a warning. Hours later, back home in her small Brooklyn apartment, Camila's cell phone vibrated, breaking the oppressive silence. It was Sarah. Camila, you won't believe what happened. She sat on the edge of her bed, her body suddenly rigid, as if petrified. The distant sound of New York sirens seemed amplified in her ears. What? How? Where? She managed to stammer, her voice almost inaudible. The air seemed to thin in Camila's room. Into the ocean, Sarah replied, her voice almost a whisper, laden with indescribable pain. A massive electrical failure. Camila couldn't speak. But what about the people? Few survivors. Sarah's words should have brought comfort, a balm to her tormented soul. But Camila felt only a cold emptiness, an overwhelming sense of guilt. I have to go now, Camila. Camila sat in the dark, the apartment silent around her. The days that followed were a blur of incessant news reports and the heavy atmosphere of mourning that hung over the city. Camila watched the reports on television, the names of the victims, the images of the wreckage recovered from the Atlantic. David, the sturdy and good-humored co-pilot, was found dead in his apartment in Boston, where he had gone to visit family, who had been rebooked on another flight because of Camila's delay, died in a bizarre accident in Los Angeles. She had fallen from a tourist observation deck in Santa Monica, inexplicably slipping on a dry, sunny surface. Police treated it as an accident, but witnesses spoke of an invisible push, a sudden loss of balance, as if an unseen force had propelled her. It's horrible. It feels like a curse. The sound of Sarah's voice, usually so vibrant, now sounded faint and distant. Sarah asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. Not just the plane falling, but the deaths afterwards. The premonition wasn't just about the flight. It was about the survivors. It was about all of us who avoided Flight 716. Death wants us back, Camila said, feeling the cold air in her apartment, despite the heater being on, as if the chill of death was seeping into her home. The breeze of Boston and the sun of Los Angeles seemed to blend in her mind, forming an image of imminent death, a dark fog that enveloped her. Camila felt a shiver run through her body. Fall. The official cause. Asphyxiation. Police suspected a gas leak. "You're traumatized," Sarah said, her voice full of genuine concern, trying to rationalize what seemed irrational. "You need to rest." Her voice gaining a desperate urgency, a fierce determination. "They are dying, one by one. And I was responsible for delaying that flight." An overwhelming sense of powerlessness invaded her, a weight that made her stoop. She had tried to cheat fate, and it was collecting its due in a cruel and calculated way, an invisible trap closing around them. But neighbors claimed there was no smell and detectives found no system failures. Camila read the news online, feeling a chill run down her spine, chilling her to the bone. Asphyxiation. She remembered the premonition, the feeling of suffocation that had struck her on the plane. Was it just a coincidence, or was fate collecting its due? The air in her room seemed to thin, as if she herself was struggling to breathe. Each twisted piece of metal a painful reminder. She felt like a ghost, haunted by the lives she hadn't been able to save, each face on the news a reminder of her helplessness. The gratitude of the few survivors was a heavy burden, a constant reminder that she had interfered with something greater. A week later, the first shock. 2 days later, a passenger, a young university student named Emily, Camila's mind began to connect the dots. A dark web forming, each strand a link to death, suffocation, fall. The methods of death seemed to echo the premonition, but in a distorted, subtle way, like a macabre whisper. She remembered the last moments of the vision, the panic, the difficulty breathing, and the sensation of freefall. It wasn't just the plane falling. It was the individual deaths, meticulously orchestrated. She called Sarah, her voice trembling, almost inaudible. "Sarah, did you hear about David and Emily?" "Yes, Camila." Sarah's voice was tense, laden with an oppressive sadness that seemed to crush her. "It's not a curse, Sarah," Camila murmured, her voice gaining a dark intensity. "It's fate." There was a silence on the other end of the line, heavy and laden with disbelief. "What do you mean?" "I saw it, Sarah." "Camila, you're talking nonsense." "No, Sarah. I need to figure out how to stop this," Camila retorted. Camila's life turned into a frantic search, an obsession that consumed every hour of her day. A grim reminder of fate's inexorability. One of the passengers, a Chicago businessman, had died in a car accident, apparently caused by a sudden illness that made him lose control and collide with a truck, suffocating amid the twisted wreckage. That we're cursed. That fate is catching up to us. Suffocation. Again. It's not just that. I had a premonition. Suffocation. Fall. She repeated, her voice almost inaudible, as if the words held a physical weight. "I had a horrible nightmare last night. I was falling, and I couldn't breathe. I woke up in a panic, my heart pounding. Not just about the plane, but about the deaths of those who escaped. Suffocation. Fall. The premonition wasn't just hers." She leaned forward, the urgency in her eyes. "Lena, we need to figure out how to stop this. What is it that connects us? What makes us targets?" "It's a pattern," she explained, her voice low, almost a shared secret. "I don't know, Camila." The cold winter breeze of New York that came through the coffee shop door, once oppressive, now seemed almost like a sign. A reminder that life continued, despite the shadow of death. They began to discuss the possible reasons, the traps that death might be setting for them. What did they have in common, besides being on the same flight? What were their deepest fears? Was fate a predator, seeking out the flaw in each of them, exploiting their weaknesses? The conversation stretched for hours, the sun setting and the city lights coming on, as they tried to unravel the enigma of their cursed lives. "But I trust you. There's something in your eyes that tells me you're right." She held Camila's hand, a gesture of silent solidarity, an unspoken pact. The pattern was undeniable to Camila, a macabre signature of death. She scoured old newspaper archives, articles about plane crashes, urban legends of premonitions and destiny, looking for any clue, any thread that could unravel the mystery. Her apartment, once neat and cozy, was now piled high with newspaper clippings, dusty books, and notes scribbled on loose papers. The smell of old paper and cold coffee hung in the air, a bitter mix that kept her awake. She barely slept. Only one woman, a university professor from Seattle named Lena, in her early 50s, with tired but sharp eyes, agreed to see her. Lena had also been rebooked due to Camila's delay, and the tone of her voice on the phone indicated that she shared the same unease. And the phrase echoed in her mind like a dark warning. The murmur of conversations and the smell of freshly ground beans offering a momentary respite from the oppression, Camila felt a small oasis of normalcy. The soft afternoon light of New York streamed through the windows, illuminating the coffee cups and the tense expressions on their faces. A chorus of ancestral voices, but Camila refused to accept it. She had succeeded once. She could succeed again. The idea that death was a predator, hunting them one by one, was the only explanation that made sense to her. She tried to contact the other survivors. They met in a discreet coffee shop in Greenwich Village. "I know what you're thinking, Camila," Lena said, her voice hoarse, taking a sip of her steaming coffee. Camila nodded, her eyes fixed on Lena's, seeking understanding and validation. Lena paled, the coffee in her cup trembling slightly. A cold shiver ran down Camila's spine. Lena looked at her, the fear in her eyes now mixed with a hint of hope, a spark of determination. As they talked, Camila felt the tension ease a little, as if a weight had been slightly lifted from her shoulders. She wasn't alone. Camila and Lena's partnership became a race against time, a desperate search for answers before death claimed its next price. Running her fingers over a map of the United States spread across her living room coffee table, where she marked the death locations with small red X. "Sis, there's a logic here." Lena's theory made terrifying sense. Death wasn't just collecting its due. Her greatest fear was powerlessness, where those who escaped a predestined death were pursued by it in other ways. The only way to break the cycle, according to some of these legends, was to face the fear head-on or find a substitute. The feeling of having no control, of being at the mercy of greater forces. The smell of impending rain in New York seemed to carry an omen. And the silence of the night in Seattle was broken only by Lena's disturbing thoughts. They knew time was running out. Death was patient, but relentless. They had to find a way to cheat fate again, or they would be the next victims. The feeling of being caught in an invisible trap was overwhelming, and with each heartbeat, Camila felt the net closing in. The premonition of the plane, the sensation of uncontrollable falling, had been the epitome of that fear. It was mocking them, using their own fears as weapons. "So, what awaits us, Lena?" Camila asked, her voice almost a whisper, fear tightening her throat, or something. "But the legends are vague," Lena replied, frustrated. "It's all very symbolic. What is our greatest fear?" "A sinister one." The smell of permanent markers and paper mingled with the aroma of coffee, a constant in their sleepless nights. They analyzed every detail of the accidents, looking for patterns, points of connection that the police had overlooked. Lena whispered one day during one of their calls, her voice hoarse from exhaustion. David had claustrophobia, and he was asphyxiated. Emily had vertigo, and she fell. The Chicago businessman was terrified of feeling trapped, and he was suffocated in the wreckage. Focusing on the nuances that only those who had felt the premonition could perceive. New York newspapers ran headlines about the mysterious deaths of Flight 716 survivors. "I've always been afraid of getting lost, of not finding my way back, of being in an unknown place with no way out." But authorities dismissed them as tragic coincidences, ignoring Camila's pleas for a deeper investigation. "They're not coincidences, Lena," Camila insisted. Lena's apartment in Seattle, specifically her study, had a scent of old books and lavender, a contrast to Camila's organized chaos. They spent hours on video calls, reviewing each of the other survivors, their routines, their deepest fears, trying to find the common thread that linked them. The tension between them was almost palpable, mixed with a growing urgency, a silent fear that propelled them. With each new death, the shadow of fate seemed to close in a little more. "They're dying from their greatest fears, aren't they?" Camila shivered. Lena hesitated, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Camila thought about herself. They began researching legends of fate and premonitions, delving into folklore and ancient stories. They found references to destiny. "A substitute?" Camila asked, skeptical but desperate. "Yes, someone who takes your place." With each passing day, the anxiety mounted.